They thought they could silence him, dismiss his pain, and bury the truth. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever, and when it surfaced, it shook everything. The sun spilled across the glass facade of Harrington & Co., a sleek tower of steel and ambition that glimmered in the afternoon light. From the outside, the company's headquarters looked flawless, an emblem of progress, efficiency, and modern values. Passersby could see their own reflections in the tinted windows, as though the building itself mirrored perfection. Yet, inside, beneath the polished surface, a different reflection existed, one that only certain employees, like Marcus Davis, could truly feel. Marcus sat at his desk on the 22nd floor, his posture straight, his tie neatly knotted, his fingers gliding across the keyboard with measured rhythm. To any casual observer, he looked like the very definition of professionalism: calm, focused, dependable. The soft hum of air conditioning mixed with the clatter of keyboards and the occasional ring of a phone. It was, in every sense, a normal afternoon at the office. But Marcus had learned long ago that what looked normal on the outside rarely matched the truth within. As he typed, he felt that the weight of eyes on him. A group of his colleagues passed by, whispering. A burst of muffled laughter followed, though nothing in the spreadsheets on his monitor was remotely funny. Marcus didn't need to hear every word to know the joke had landed at his expense. It always did. One voice, sharp and careless, carried just enough for him to catch. "Man, I swear, I don't know how he even got this job." The words pierced, though Marcus kept his face steady, his hands moving as if nothing had reached him. He had mastered the art of appearing unbothered. It was survival. To react meant confirming their stereotypes, feeding their narrative. So he swallowed it down, buried the sting deep inside, and let the rhythm of his typing be his shield. Still, silence didn't make the hurt disappear. It only made it quieter. Moments later, another colleague drifted past his desk, offering him the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. It was the smile of dismissal, of condescension, the smile people wear when they believe they are above you. Behind Marcus, two men exchanged looks and chuckled. One leaned closer to the other, whispering something about Marcus's accent. They didn't bother lowering their voices enough. Marcus paused, his hands hovering over the keys. For a split second, he wanted to turn around, to confront them, to ask why men who knew nothing about his story felt entitled to belittle the way he spoke. English was his first language, but that didn't stop them. To them, his voice was a caricature, a punchline in their routine of superiority. He took a breath, steady and measured. Then he returned to his work, refusing to give them the satisfaction of breaking his calm. The office itself was a theater of contradictions. Posters hung on the walls with bold slogans. "Diversity is our strength. Respect in every interaction." Those words stared down at Marcus every day, a cruel irony, for they seemed to apply to everyone but him. He sometimes wondered if those posters were put there as decorations or as shields to hide the cracks no one wanted to admit were real. The microaggressions came in waves, subtle, constant, relentless. An offhand comment about how articulate he was, as though it were surprising. A teammate bypassing him in meetings, speaking over his suggestions until the same idea was applauded. When repeated by someone else, a casual remark about fitting. And during after-work drinks he was never invited to attend. They weren't knives, not exactly not sharp enough to leave visible wounds, but they were needles, small pricks that accumulated day after day, leaving invisible scars across his spirit. And the worst part, no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed and simply didn't care. Marcus adjusted his glasses, focusing again on his monitor. He had a deadline to meet, and deadlines didn't wait for dignity. He told himself that if he just worked harder, kept his head down, produced results no one could ignore, maybe, just maybe, the noise around him would fade. But deep down, in a place he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge, Marcus knew the truth. Hard work wasn't the antidote. It had never been enough, not when the rules of the game were written to keep him on the sidelines. Across the office, the laughter rose again, pulling his attention for the briefest of moments. His gaze flicked to the glass walls of the HR office, a box of authority perched like a watchtower over the floor. Inside, a manager sat scrolling through emails, oblivious to the small cruelties happening just beyond the glass. Marcus wondered if anyone inside that office would ever take his voice seriously. If the company that boasted so loudly about fairness would ever listen when fairness was needed most. For now, He stayed quiet, fingers returning to the keyboard. His silence wasn't surrender. It was patience, because silence, Marcus knew, was often the first note in a much larger storm. The afternoon sun shifted across the office floor, painting long shadows that crawled over cubicles and polished glass walls. The hum of computers blended with the faint tapping of fingers. On keyboards, the steady rhythm of corporate routine. To anyone walking in, it looked like productivity incarnate, an office alive with ambition. But for Marcus, the soundscape of the office carried something else: whispers, muffled laughter, and a constant reminder that he did not quite belong. That day, the whispers grew sharper. Marcus had just returned from the break room, a fresh cup of coffee warming in his hand. He walked past a cluster of colleagues gathered near the printer, their voices lowered as he approached, but not low enough. Honestly, his accent is so distracting. One of them muttered, her tone dripping with condescension. I don't even get how he got hired here, another voice added, followed by the brittle crack of laughter. The words cut through him like glass. Sharp and uninvited, Marcus froze for a fraction of a second, coffee trembling slightly in his grip. He wanted to believe he had misheard, but he hadn't. The sting was too familiar, too precise. His ears had become attuned to cruelty disguised as casual banter. He kept walking, placing the cup on his desk with careful precision, as though the steadiness of his movements could anchor the storm that churned inside him. His heart raced, but his face remained calm, disciplined. He had learned to mask the hurt, to bury the fire. But beneath the surface, frustration pulsed. This was no longer something he could shrug off. Not today. Marcus sat down, staring at the HR office through the glass partition. The posters about fairness and diversity seemed to mock him, their bold letters promising protection that never reached him. He thought of the company handbook, the countless training modules about respect and zero tolerance for harassment. He had believed them once. Now he wondered if they were just words. But still, some part of him clung to hope. He told himself that this time would be different, that if he walked in, spoke honestly, and placed his pain into the hands of those who claimed to safeguard employees, he might finally be heard. So he stood, straightened his tie, and walked toward the glass office. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside, the HR manager, a woman named Linda, sat behind her desk, scrolling through emails. Her office smelled faintly of citrus air freshener, a sterile contrast to the tension Marcus carried in with him. She looked up, eyebrows raised, her expression polite but distant. Marcus, what can I do for you? She asked, her voice lilting with rehearsed cheer. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke carefully, his tone measured, almost cautious. I need to file a complaint, he began. Some of my co-workers have been making comments about my accent, about how I don't belong here. I overheard them today. This isn't the first time. Linda tilted her head, her smile still fixed in place. But something shifted in her eyes, something Marcus recognized as dismissal even before she spoke. She leaned back, folding her hands in front of her, as though preparing to deliver a rehearsed line. Marcus, she said softly, almost as if speaking to a child, I'm sure they didn't mean it like that. People joke around. Don't take it so personally. The words landed heavier than the laughter he had endured moments ago. He blinked, searching her face for any sign of empathy, any hint that she would write down his words, open a file, do anything beyond smoothing over discomfort with platitudes. But there was nothing, just that practiced, tight smile. I don't think it was just a joke. Marcus tried again, his voice firmer this time. It's been happening for a while. It's starting to feel hostile. I thought the company had a policy. Linda interrupted with a gentle wave of her hand, her smile widening as though she could erase the weight of his words with charm. Marcus, listen, you're a good worker. Don't let little things distract you. Focus on your projects. That's the best way to prove himself. As though he hadn't already been doing exactly that. The coffee in his stomach curdled. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to nod, his lips pressed into a thin line. Arguing felt pointless. He could see it in her posture, in the way her body leaned away from him, in the way her eyes flicked to her computer screen as though she was already moving on. He left the office with nothing but the echo of her words chasing him down the hall. Don't be so sensitive, Marcus. Just focus on your work. Back at his desk, he sat in silence, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. For the first time in years, The keys did not move. He stared at the screen, his reflection faint against the glow, his jaw tight with frustration. He had done everything right. He had followed the rules, trusted the system, spoken respectfully, chosen his words carefully, and still, he had been dismissed, his experience reduced to oversensitivity, his pain rewritten as weakness dotted around him. The office carried on as if nothing had happened. Phones rang, printers whirred, laughter bubbled from corners. The world spun forward while Marcus had frozen in place, his voice silenced once again. A heaviness pressed on his chest, not just the hurt of being mocked, but the deeper wound of being unheard. It was one thing to endure cruelty from peers. It was another to be told by those in power that the cruelty did not matter. For the first time, Marcus felt something stronger than hurt, a profound helplessness, but somewhere beneath that helplessness, a spark still burned. A quiet thought whispered to him, almost drowned by the noise of dismissal. If no one would protect him, maybe he would have to protect himself. That thought stayed with him, flickering, refusing to die, and in time, it would grow into something far greater than the HR manager's smile could ever contain. The weeks bled into months, and Marcus soon discovered that silence, once chosen as survival, was no longer enough to protect him. The whispers hadn't faded, they had multiplied. What had begun as mocking comments about his accent grew into something darker, sharper. Passing remarks turned into pointed jokes, and small smirks in the hallway became open ridicule in meetings. It was never loud enough to warrant public outrage, never violent enough to be obvious. It was the kind of cruelty designed to survive under fluorescent lights, subtle, deniable, corrosive. Marcus adapted. He carried a small notebook tucked discreetly into his bag, and every time something happened, he wrote it down, a date, a time. A line of dialogue burned into his memory. How did he even get hired? He's just not a cultural fit. You know how people like him are. Each phrase landed in ink like a scar pressed onto paper. Emails, too, began to tell their own story. Messages excluding him from meetings he should have attended. Threads where his name was mentioned as a problem, as someone hard to collaborate with. He saved them all. Screen captures filled hidden folders on his laptop. Each one a piece of evidence he never wanted to need, but knew he might. Still, Marcus tried to believe in the process. He went back to HR, his tone calm but firm, laying out what he had collected. The same polite nods met him each time, the same shallow promises. We'll look into it, Marcus. We take this very seriously. Unfortunately, we didn't find enough evidence. The words became a chorus, rehearsed and empty. Each visit left him more invisible than the last. He would leave the glass office with nothing but a hollow echo of reassurance and the gnawing certainty that his file was being quietly buried in the archives of neglect. And while HR minimized him, the office amplified the rumors. Colleagues began to whisper that Marcus was difficult to work with. It was always said with a shrug, always passed along as if it were common knowledge. People stopped including him in brainstorming sessions. His ideas, once strong enough to carry projects forward, were now spoken over, erased, then repeated by someone else for applause. Then came the promotions ones he had worked years to earn. He would see his name on the short list, hear whispers of his qualifications, only to watch the position slip away into someone else's hands, always someone less experienced, but somehow deemed a better fit. When Marcus asked about it, managers leaned back in their chairs, their tones carefully neutral. You're very talented, Marcus, but some people say you're hard to approach. You don't blend with the team culture. Maybe if you work on your communication style. His communication style, the irony stung. His voice was the very thing they mocked, and now it was being used against him. He tried harder. He volunteered for projects, stayed late, produced results beyond what was required, and still, the subtle retaliation grew. Invitations to team events bypassed him. Important conversations happened in closed rooms without his presence. The silence of exclusion was louder than laughter at times. Marcus would sit at his desk long after others had gone home, staring at the glow of his monitor, his reflection faint against the screen. He would wonder if he was imagining it all, if somehow he had twisted reality into cruelty. But then he would open his folder of evidence, the notes, the emails, the saved screenshots, and the truth would stare back at him. He wasn't imagining. He was enduring. The building itself seemed to turn against him. The posters on the walls with their slogans, "Inclusion is innovation," mocked him now. Every word felt like a lie written in bold font. Every diversity statement in the company newsletter felt like salt pressed into a wound dot at lunch. He would sometimes catch co-workers glancing at him from across the cafeteria, their voices dropping when he passed. He could almost hear the rumors threading through their conversations. Difficult, sensitive, doesn't fit. One day, he overheard his name again, this time from a manager's lips. Marcus is a great worker, but he's complicated. Just not sure he's leadership material. Leadership material. The phrase clung to him like smoke, suffocating in its vagueness. He had all the qualifications, all the experience, but none of the favor. And no matter how many times he went to HR, the pattern repeated: dismissal, minimization, erasure. By the time autumn came, Marcus carried a heaviness that never seemed to lift. Each morning, walking into the office felt like stepping into a theater where he was both actor and target, forced to play a role while enduring the quiet blows of a script written against him. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, something else had begun to stir, a quiet defiance, buried but growing. Each document he saved, each note he wrote, was no longer just a coping mechanism. It was preparation. It was the silent assembling of truth, piece by piece. In a world that insisted on pretending otherwise, for now, the company had succeeded in making him invisible. But Marcus knew the day would come when the evidence he carried would make the invisible undeniable. And when that day came, it would not be the whispers echoing through the office that people remembered. It would be his voice, rising from the silence they tried so hard to impose. Marcus had reached the edge of his patience. By late November, the office no longer felt like a place of work, but like a battlefield disguised in suits and spreadsheets. Every day was another skirmish, an offhand remark, a missed opportunity, a smile that carried more venom than warmth. He had fought quietly, armed with patience, evidence, and hope. But hope had begun to feel like a cruel joke. On a gray Thursday afternoon, he sat at his desk long after most of the office had emptied, the glow of his monitor reflecting off tired eyes. His resignation letter sat half-written on the screen, a simple, polite exit masked as pursuing other opportunities. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he couldn't bring himself to finish. Resigning felt like surrender, yet staying felt unbearable. That was when he heard a voice, soft and hesitant, behind him. Marcus? He turned. Standing a few feet away was Eli, one of the company's interns. A quiet young man who usually kept to himself. Eli often moved, like a shadow in the office scene, but rarely heard. He wore the kind of nervous expression that suggested he wasn't used to initiating conversations, especially not ones like this. Marcus blinked, surprised. Eli, what's up? The intern shifted from foot to foot, glancing around the empty floor as though making sure no one else lingered. His voice lowered to a whisper. I need to tell you something. Something important. Marcus straightened, sensing the weight in Ellie's tone. Go on. Ellie's hands trembled slightly as he pulled his phone from his pocket. He hesitated, then pressed play on a recording. The sound that emerged made Marcus's stomach knot. It was the unmistakable voice of one of his managers, sharp with cruelty. Honestly, I don't care what he complains about. Just smile, nod, and tell him we'll look into it. Then drop it. He's always so sensitive. Another voice joined in, laughter spilling between words. Yeah, exactly. If we actually did something every time he whined, we'd never get any work done. Just keep him busy and out of the way. Marcus froze, the blood rushing in his ears. The words were damning, casual in their malice. Eli paused the recording, his eyes wide with urgency. I've been recording some of the meetings. I know, I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stand what I was hearing. They talk about you all the time. The way they laugh, the way they plot to brush you off. It's wrong, Marcus. It's so wrong. For a moment, Marcus could only stare, his breath shallow. He had imagined this possibility countless times, that behind closed doors, his managers weren't just negligent, but complicit. But to hear it, to have proof, it was something else entirely. Why are you showing me this? Marcus asked, his voice quiet but steady. Eli swallowed hard. Because I can't keep watching it happen. You've been fighting this alone, and nobody listens. But this, he held up the phone. This they can't ignore. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his hand pressing against his mouth. His half-written resignation letter blinked on the screen behind him. Forgotten. Proof. Undeniable. Irrefutable proof. For months, he had been dismissed, silenced. gaslight into questioning his own reality. And now, in the trembling hands of an intern, that reality had been captured in cold. Unflinching audio. It was as though a weight lifted from his chest, only to be replaced by something sharper. Resolve. Eli, Marcus said slowly, you don't know what this means. The intern gave a nervous smile, almost apologetic. I think I do. I just couldn't keep it to myself anymore. Marcus nodded, his mind racing. The notebook filled with dates, the folder of emails, the screenshots alone. They had been fragile threads, easy for HR to dismiss, but with this recording, those threads wove into a rope strong enough to drag the truth into the light. For the first time in months, Marcus felt power shift subtle, but undeniable. The silence they had forced upon him cracked under the weight of their own words. Preserved forever in Ellie's recordings. That night, Marcus didn't finish his resignation letter. Instead, he saved the audio file to his drive, carefully labeling it. He created copies, securing them as though they were treasure, because in truth, they were, not just for him, but for every employee who had ever been silenced under the guise of professionalism. As he left the office, the winter air bit against his skin, but he hardly noticed. For the first time, the building towering behind him seemed smaller, its glass weight less impenetrable, its power no longer felt absolute. Marcus walked into the night with something far greater than resignation. He walked away with proof, undeniable evidence that the system meant to protect him had, in fact, betrayed him. And though he was only beginning to understand the magnitude of what he carried, one truth rang clear in his mind. The narrative was no longer theirs to write. It was his. And soon, the world would hear it. The decision did not come easily. For nights, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling, Ellie's recordings echoing in his ears, the voices of his managers mocking, dismissive, cruel, played over and over, refusing to fade. They weren't just words, they were confessions, proof of a system designed to silence him. At first, Marcus thought about sending them anonymously to HR, one last chance for the company to right its wrongs. But then he remembered every meeting, every tired smile, every empty promise of we'll look into it. HR wasn't protection, it was camouflage. He realized now that the rot went deeper than a few bad managers. It was the whole structure, the culture itself, that had chosen silence over justice. So, instead of another visit to HR, Marcus made a call. The lawyer's office was quiet, lined with dark shelves heavy with books. The attorney, a seasoned man named Carter Williams, leaned forward, his expression sharpening as Marcus laid out his story. The notebook, the emails, the screenshots, and finally, Ellie's recordings, all placed carefully on the desk like pieces of a puzzle. That revealed something damning. By the time Marcus finished, Carter's jaw was set. This, the lawyer said, tapping the recorder with deliberate force, is not just workplace harassment. This is systemic discrimination, and it's actionable. For the first time in months, Marcus felt seen, truly seen. The lawsuit was filed within weeks. What began as a quiet legal process soon erupted into something much larger. The complaint wasn't against a few individuals. It was against the corporation itself, Harrington & Co., the proud beacon of diversity in its glossy brochures. The claim accused them of fostering a hostile work environment, ignoring complaints, and enabling managers to retaliate against an employee for speaking out. When the news broke, it spread like wildfire. One morning, Marcus walked into the office to find hushed voices following him. Headlines blinked across phones and computer screens. Black employee sues Harrington & Co. for discrimination. Whistleblower alleges HR cover-up. The company's spotless reputation, polished over decades, began to crack under the public gaze. The atmosphere inside the building shifted overnight. The same colleagues who had once laughed at him in hallways now avoided eye contact. Their whispers still filled the air, but the tone had changed. No longer mocking, now it was fearful. His name, once paired with difficult and sensitive, was now paired with another word, lawsuit. In meetings, people who used to talk over him suddenly fell silent when he spoke. Managers who once dismissed his presence now forced awkward smiles, their voices carefully neutral, as though every word might become evidence. The irony was bitter. Marcus had never been treated with more caution than when the truth threatened to expose them all. The corporation tried to contain the damage. Internal emails assured employees that the company took the allegations very seriously. HR circulated new reminders about inclusivity training. The CEO released a polished video statement, eyes full of practiced sincerity, insisting that Harrington and Co. had always upheld the highest standards of fairness. But the recordings told another story, and they had already leaked. The audio clips hit the news like a hammer. Reporters played them on morning broadcasts, managers laughing about brushing off complaints, mocking Marcus, strategizing how to silence him. The casual cruelty, captured in their own words, was undeniable. It stripped away the facade of polished diversity posters and corporate slogans. Outside the building, protesters began to gather. Signs reading "Justice for Marcus" and "No More Silence" lined the sidewalks. Employees slipped past them with lowered heads, avoiding cameras, avoiding Marcus himself. The world now saw what he had endured in silence for so long. Marcus walked the halls with a quiet gravity. He did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He carried himself with the same professionalism he always had, but now it was different. The power dynamic had shifted. Where once he had been invisible, now he was undeniable, and yet the experience was not without its loneliness. The same colleagues who had laughed at him never came to apologize. They did not stand beside him. Instead, they retreated into silence, fearful of being pulled into the storm. The isolation hurt, but Marcus understood. People were quick to participate in cruelty, but rare to show courage when truth demanded it. As the lawsuit gained traction, journalists dug deeper. Former employees came forward, sharing their own stories of complaints ignored, of favoritism, of subtle retaliation. What had started as Marcus's battle grew into something larger, a collective reckoning. The narrative shifted from one man's pain to a culture of discrimination. Embedded in the company itself, Harrington and Co.'s name, once spoken with pride in corporate circles, now carried a different weight: scandal, betrayal, hypocrisy, and at the center of it all stood Marcus, not as the man they mocked, not as the employee they silenced, but as the one who forced the truth into the light. In quiet moments, he still thought of the notebook where it had all begun, the lonely scribbles written in the margins of despair. He thought of Ellie's trembling hands, passing him the recording that would change everything. He thought of every sleepless night, where resignation had felt like the only escape. Now, he understood, those nights had not been for nothing. The lawsuit was no longer just about him. It was about accountability, about tearing down a facade that had hidden cruelty for too long. And whether he won or lost, the truth was already out there, carving its own path, too loud to ever be silenced again. The courtroom was hushed, its polished wooden benches filled with faces both curious and cautious. The air carried a gravity that pressed on every chest, the kind of silence that precedes revelations, too heavy to ignore. Journalists sat with notepads poised, their pens eager to capture history at the plaintiff's table. Marcus adjusted his suit jacket, his expression steady but solemn. He had never imagined his fight would lead him here under fluorescent lights, before a jury of strangers who now held the weight of his truth in their hands. Across the room, the representatives of Harrington and Co. sat rigid, their lawyers shuffling, papers with forced composure. Behind them, managers once so smug in their authority now avoided Marcus's gaze, their confidence eroded by weeks of exposure. Even the HR manager, Linda, whose smile once dismissed his pain, now sat pale and silent. Her composure cracked. The judge's gavel struck. "Proceed." Marcus's lawyer, Carter Williams, rose with calm precision. He moved to the center of the room, his voice even but sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard testimony, you have seen documents, but today you will hear something more powerful than any argument I could ever make. You will hear the truth in their own words." He pressed a button. The courtroom filled with sound, the tinny yet unmistakable recording of Marcus's managers. "Honestly, I don't care what he complains about. Just smile, nod, and tell him we'll look into it. Then drop it. He's always so sensitive." A gasp rippled through the benches. Another voice followed, casual and mocking. "Yeah, exactly. If we actually did something every time he whined, we'd never get any work done. Just keep him busy and out of the way." The words echoed against the paneled walls, lingering long after the recording stopped. The jury shifted in their seats, their faces a mix of disbelief and disgust. One juror shook her head slowly, her eyes narrowing with outrage. The reporter scribbled furiously, pen scratching faster with every syllable. Carter's voice cut through the silence. This is how they spoke about an employee who came to them for help. This is how they treated complaints of discrimination. They laughed. They mocked. They conspired to do nothing. And HR, the very department meant to protect workers, joined in their betrayal. Linda, the HR manager, lowered her head as the defense scrambled to object, but the judge waved them down. The damage was done. One by one, the recordings played snippets of derision, strategies to ignore Marcus's pleas, laughter at his expense. Each clip landed like a hammer blow, stripping away layers of corporate denial. What had once been whispers in hallways was now broadcast under oath, undeniable and permanent. When Marcus took the stand, the courtroom leaned in. His voice was calm, deliberate, carrying the weight of months spent silenced. He described the jokes, the mispromotions, the retaliations. He spoke of the endless strips to HR, of being told to focus on work while his dignity was brushed aside. And he spoke of the loneliness, how the laughter of colleagues cut deeper than silence. Yet, there was no bitterness in his tone, only truth. When Carter asked, "Marcus, why did you choose to fight instead of walk away?" he paused, his eyes sweeping the jury. "Because it was never just about me," Marcus said. "Every time they ignored me, they sent a message to others. That speaking up doesn't matter. That injustice is normal. I couldn't let that stand, not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been told their pain is exaggeration. I wanted the truth to be heard." His words hung in the air, steady and unshaken. For the first time, Marcus's voice filled a room, without interruption, without dismissal, without mockery. When the verdict came, it was swift and decisive. The jury found Harrington and Co. guilty of fostering a hostile work environment, of ignoring discrimination, of retaliation against an employee. The damages awarded were staggering. Millions of dollars, meant not just as compensation, but as a warning to every corporation watching. But money was not the only sentence. The company was ordered to issue a public apology, a statement of accountability to be broadcast as widely as their diversity campaigns once were. The carefully polished image of Harrington and Co. had been shattered, replaced by the undeniable truth of their cruelty. As the judge read the final order, Marcus sat still, his hands folded in front of him. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. What he felt was something deeper than victory, release, the weight of months, of years, of silence and humiliation lifted from his chest. Across the room, those who had laughed at him now stared at the floor. Their smirks were gone, their arrogance replaced with the silence of defeat. They had once treated his voice as a nuisance. Now it was the very voice that dismantled their power. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as protesters cheered, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, asking how it felt to win. Marcus simply raised his head and said, "This wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who felt powerless. No one should be silenced when they're seeking justice." And in that moment, Marcus was no longer the employee mocked in break rooms. He was a symbol of resilience, of truth, of the power that emerges when silence finally breaks. The courthouse steps were crowded that afternoon, bathed in golden sunlight as the day stretched toward evening. A breeze carried the murmur of voices, supporters, reporters, and strangers who had come simply to witness history. Marcus stood just beyond the threshold, the heavy doors of the courtroom behind him, the open world ahead. For months, his life had been confined to cubicles, whispered ridicule, and the suffocating indifference of HR offices. Now, the sky above seemed wider, brighter, as if it too acknowledged that truth had finally broken free. He walked slowly down the steps, each movement deliberate. Around him, microphones thrust forward. Questions volleyed with urgency. "What does this mean for you? How do you feel knowing you won? What comes next?" Marcus. But he did not rush to answer. For once, silence was his own to command, not imposed upon him, not forced by laughter or dismissal, but chosen. He paused at the bottom of the stairs, turning to face the crowd. His voice, when it came, was steady and resonant, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had suffered deeply and endured. "This fight," Marcus began, "was never just mine. It was about every worker who's been told their pain is too small to matter, every person silenced by fear of retaliation, every voice dismissed because it was inconvenient for those in power." The crowd hushed, leaning in. For too long, silence has been mistaken for peace. But silence in the face of injustice is not peace, it's complicity. And when those in power ignore the truth, they may delay it, but they cannot bury it. The truth will rise. It always does. His words echoed through the plaza, amplified not by microphones, but by conviction. Behind him, the glass facade of the corporate building still glimmered in the distance, a monument to wealth and influence, yet even that polished tower seemed smaller now. Its reputation fractured, its dominance humbled. Marcus looked at the reporters, their pens scratching frantically. He looked at the young interns scattered among the crowd, wide-eyed and attentive. And he thought of the quiet intern who had come to him with the recording's proof. That courage sometimes grows in the most unexpected places. That day, the intern's whisper had toppled an empire of silence. Sometimes, Marcus realized, it is not the loudest voice that changes the world, but the one brave enough to speak it all. As he stepped away from the courthouse, his lawyer at his side, he felt the weight of the journey settle into meaning, the exhaustion, the humiliation. The long nights spent documenting every insult and every dismissal, they were not erased, but transformed. His pain had become testimony. His silence had become sound. His story had become a warning that no company, no system could thrive on injustice forever. In the days that followed, the ripple spread. Newspapers carried headlines: corporate giant falls to employees' lawsuit, hidden discrimination exposed, truth recorded, justice served. Workers in offices across the country shared the story in hushed break rooms, some with trembling hands, others with newfound resolve. For every Marcus who had spoken, there were countless others who hadn't, but now they knew change was possible. Inside Harrington & Co., the hallways that once echoed with laughter at Marcus's expense now pulsed with unease. Training sessions were mandated, apologies drafted, leadership restructured. Yet no policy, no fine, no forced reform could erase the fact that a single employee's courage had brought the corporation to its knees. And Marcus, once overlooked, once mocked, stood taller than any glass tower. At night, he would sit by his window, looking out at the city lights, and reflect on the path that had led him here. The interns' recordings, the courtroom verdict, the crowd outside the courthouse, it all felt bigger than him, yet deeply tied to who he was. For the first time in years, he breathed without heaviness, his chest free of the invisible weight that discrimination had pressed upon it. He knew others would still face battles like his. He knew injustice was not vanquished in a single trial. But he also knew this truth: once one voice breaks through, it lights the way for others. And so, Marcus carried no bitterness, only purpose. He spoke at small gatherings, at universities, at community centers, sharing his story not as a tale of victory, but as a reminder that power without accountability is fragile, a reminder that silence, when chosen by the oppressed, could be broken into something stronger than noise. Justice. In time, his story became less about a lawsuit and more about resilience, less about the fall of a company and more about the rise of a man who refused to be erased. As the narrator's voice would later frame it, silence in the face of injustice is complicity. When those in power ignore the truth will eventually rise. And sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest power. And there, beneath the glow of city lights and the memory of the courtroom, Marcus understood. He had once been dismissed as invisible. Now, he was unforgettable.